Solaria Presents. We're here this evening with director, producer, and performer Scott Kelman, most recently from the Los Angeles area. An artist named Frank Zappa once said that he wanted to be introduced as a national treasure, and according to Richard Staten, writing for LA Style, Scott Kelman is a buried treasure. Doesn't mean he hasn't been discovered yet. His performing and award credits are numerous, including awards from Dramalog and LA Weekly. And his theater has received awards for direction, performance, music, writing, set design. And his performance and directing credits include working with people like Peter Bergman, Paul Krasner, Kedrick Robin Wolf, Michael Glass, John Densmore, Whoopi Goldberg, and Tim Robbins, who is most recently starring in the Shawshank Redemption motion picture. Scott, tell me about some of this stuff. Tell me about the awards, particularly the Margaret Harford Award.
Well, this all took place in Los Angeles, which I moved to in 1981, 82. I just got to Portland about 4 or 5 months ago. Fled from LA after 12 rapturous years in Babylon, and I opened 3 theaters which I had running in the downtown area, working with a lot of performance art, experimental theater, and some of those names are some of the people who worked in the theater, people I collaborated with. There was the Margaret Harford Award, which is an award given by the LA Theater Critics, and I forget the exact quotes as to why I got the award. I think it says something like,
I have that
it's
here.
over there.
It's for unwavering commitment to innovative theater for LA that is unashamedly experimental and unapologetically political.
Okay, so it's supposed to be the most prestigious theater award given every year or every other year, and one year I got it for that. And I realized that that was the kiss of death, because once you're defined, you can no longer outrage the powers that be. So when all the awards started to come in, maybe 5, 6, 7 years after I opened the theaters and we started to get some recognition and acclaim, I knew it was just a matter of time before the trip was over. And so that was just one of the awards that the theater won. I'd say that the best times were when things were first starting. That's usually the best time, when all you're concerned with is the work, and then as you start to acquire a certain image or whatever, that's when you start to get into trouble. And after 12 years, I felt that I was in trouble and it was time to move out and start all over again. That's why I'm here.
Okay. Well, what is Pipeline?
Pipeline was a not-for-profit corporation that I started in LA, an arts organization, which really consisted of 3 theaters beginning in 1981. It's the Factory Place Theater, the Boyd Street Theater, and another theater called the Wall and Boyd. And I ran those theaters throughout the 80s and continued my work in other venues up until the time I left there about 6 months ago.
Okay. Well, before we get into more about your work, I want to talk about some of your personal background. You're a native of New York, and you have family there and worked in the family business for a while. And tell me what that was like.
Well, actually, I was being groomed for a family business, which was the jewelry business. And this took place in the 60s. And it was a very exciting time. And I found my life very, very boring. I was married and had a very, very secure position with the family business. And along came the 60s. And somebody told me to check out an acting school. Might bring some passion into my life. So I went to acting school for about 2 years. And it was really boring. Fortunately, there were some very exciting things happening on the Lower East Side in New York,
Mm-hmm.
especially in theater. All kinds of unusual experiments going down in places like La Mama, St. Mark's, and you might even say a revolution of sorts. And I got very turned on by that.
Mm-hmm.
And after about 2 years in acting school, it felt almost like a bad job, you know, sort of like you spend most of your time trying to like get your image together and trying to get somebody to let you be in a play. And then there was this incredible activity going down on the Lower East Side, which seemed to be both political and spiritual in nature. And I decided to forget about a career in theater and just have a good time doing it. So fortunately for me, I fell in with some very, very exciting people who turned me on to the potential of art, and especially the potential of art in theater. And it was just a matter of time before I quit my job, quit the family business, and decided be an artist.
Mm-hmm. So you moved basically from one kind of jewel to another.
Yeah, sorts.
Now, what's the Off Broadway Association?
Well, at that time there was Broadway and there was off-Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were these little theaters, about a dozen of them, the most well-known being La Mama and St. Mark's, also another called Judson Memorial Church, and eventually this got to be called Off-Broadway.
Mm-hmm.
And I started a thing called the Off-Broadway Association, about a dozen theaters. And that eventually became what is known now as UBA, the Off-Broadway Alliance. There's probably hundreds of theaters that belong to it now. And UBA probably doesn't know that I was the predecessor of their organization. So that's what that was all about.
Okay. Well, in addition to some of your theater work, you also produced other people such as O.C. Smith, who later, he was from Count Basie's band, later went on to record a tune called Little Green Apples, which I think a lot of people have heard. And Benny Powell.
Well, actually, I'll just correct that a
Sure,
little
go
bit,
ahead.
okay? O.C. was like a good friend of mine. He was a jazz singer.
Mm-hmm.
And Benny was a trombone player with Basie at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And Benny started going to acting school.
Mm-hmm.
And on the side, because everybody was quitting Basie's band at that time, so nobody had any gigs, and I decided to produce them. So I would produce these little jazz concerts. That was my first entry into the entertainment field.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember everybody worked for $40. And
It's about what they make now.
and people like Willie Bobo and just a lot of people that were leaving well-known bands and trying to get started. So anyway, Benny went to acting school and came back and he told me about this place. This is before I even got involved with acting. He said, you ought to check it out. And so that's actually how I got into acting, through Benny Powell and through jazz musicians. And jazz has been a real influence on the work I do, all the process work I do, which we'll be talking about
Okay.
a little bit later.
Well, I wanted to ask you specifically about something else. You mentioned that you've had 4 heart attacks and a quadruple bypass. Now, somewhere between getting started in the 60s and arriving in Portland in 1994, when did that happen and what's going on with that? How does that affect your work and what are you doing about it?
Well, the nature of my work became pretty experimental, and I got involved really more and more while I was doing this work with the creative process and the potential of theater, which is always realized and unrealized, realized, unrealized. In other words, there's always something else which has the potential to be a theater piece. And so that's sort of like the road that I was on in the 60s and 70s. And I was influenced by some very good people, like the Becks from the Living Theater and Joe Chaikin from the Open Theater. And somewhere down the line, what I started to pick up on was that everything had the potential for a theater piece. I mean, even a moment could be played from all different angles for an hour and had the potential of a theater piece, as well as stories and different things like that. Also, what happened, I guess I had my first heart attack in the mid-70s, a massive heart attack. And I remember I was at a party one day, and I was approached by two psychiatrists who came to me with this disdain and said to me, "Why do you think you had your heart attack?" And right away I got a bit defensive and I said, "For my next piece, of course," and I walked away. And then I realized it was true, that it's all just grist for the mill. So now, whenever something happens to me, I don't have to agonize as to why did this happen to me. I know it's for the next piece, whenever that happens. I ended up having another heart attack, which made two on the East Coast. And I had a sister in California that wanted me to move out there and join her, you know. And I kept telling her that I would never move to California because I knew it was Babylon, and I would be susceptible to Babylon, and I would not move there until it was time to die. After my second heart attack, I decided it was time to move to California.
Okay.
And things kind of worked out nicely in that I had two heart attacks on the East Coast, and I had two heart attacks on the West Coast, which gave me a nice symmetry
Yeah.
for a piece that I'm working on now called Angina, an Affair of the Heart, which I hope to be performing sometime this year.
Good, great. We're going to look forward to that. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about specifically is your work with the homeless. And I read that you had worked with homeless writers and the Los Angeles Poverty Department and prison inmates and all that, and you received, or your theater received the Mayor Tom Bradley Award. And the homeless, in this area, there is a class of people we call the homeless, but a lot of people in this area are right on the edge. They've been back and forth. And there's some incredible sidewalk art here. There's some wonderful poetry. We have public speaking areas. And I feel that one of the first things that happens to people when they experience extreme poverty is that they lose part of their humanity. And it's kind of like you get kicked out of the human race if you don't have a street address. And it seems to me that maybe your work with the poor and homeless is a way of welcoming people back into the human race without having to qualify for a mortgage or a rental contract. So how did you get these people together, and what did you do, and what are they doing, and what else are you going to do about it?
Actually, it didn't happen that way at all. What happened was when I first got to LA and started to check it out, I decided that I needed a space to do theater in, and space was pretty expensive. And people told me about downtown and told me not to go downtown. But there was something about downtown that attracted me, aside from the price. And I opened my theaters downtown. Then there was talk that there would be this whole renaissance happening in downtown LA. This was the early 80s. So I opened like the first theaters down there. And it turned out that the homeless people were my neighbors because I was really right on the border of Skid Row. And I got to know a number of the people on the street pretty well. And somebody introduced me to a guy who had just kind of arrived from Memphis or someplace like that, a real character that they had found on Hollywood Boulevard, playing a flute and leading a parade of people, almost like the Pied Piper, and figured he should meet me. And they brought him to me, and he became my security guard. And he would dress up in this whole outfit, and he was called the Avant-Gardian. And he also got to know a lot of people on the street, you know, when he was looking after the theaters. And he wasn't like a, you know, this kind of a security guard. He used to just charm people and play practical jokes and everything. Very endearing figure. Somebody told me about a group of homeless people that were meeting at an office and trying to get a piece together, headed by a guy named John Malpete, and I should go check him out. So I went down to this office, and a number of the people were actually people who had been in mental institutions and stuff like that. And they were trying to get this piece together. And the rehearsal process was like really fascinating. I mean, because nobody could remember lines. People were having arguments all the time, cracking jokes. John Malpete was going crazy. you know. And I just watched this event one evening, and I walked out of there, and I couldn't believe the insanity of the evening with these people trying to get through this piece, and how in the world are they ever going to get through the piece, you know. And it was a process that everybody agonized over. I mean, there was one guy, his name was Jim Beam. He wrote the piece. He was like one of these guys who, when you walked in and you looked at him, like he would just curse and curse and curse and all these words. I can't say them on television. Right? They just come out of his mouth like this and like that and da-da-da, and then he'd just walk away. And I'd follow him into another room, and he'd just blah, 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 and he'd walk into another room. And I'd just follow him into another room. And then one day he just went, hey, man, why don't you leave me alone? What do you want? You know, I said, I just want to know a little bit about you, Jim. You know, got to know them. And we started to work on a structure because we had a problem here. How do we get through the piece? So we decided that we would produce the piece, and Jim wrote the piece. And the piece was supposedly about his life when he was younger. He claimed that he was a union organizer who organized the wrong union and was being chased around the world by the mafia. That was the basic story of the piece. And so in the piece, there would be the effort to complete the piece as well as the piece itself. So it became sort of like a subtext, an interesting subtext. Sometimes they couldn't finish the piece. Sometimes they had fights in the middle. And Malpe, the director, would have to jump in, separate them, explain to the audience that this fight was not supposed to happen. They forgot to go to Costa Rica. Now we're going to send them to Costa Rica. Please, everybody go to Costa Rica. They would go to Costa Rica, remember the lines, get through Costa Rica, blah, blah, blah. And the piece became an event. And became very, very well known in LA, and people were coming in from all over the place. In fact, the LAPD got very well known, became internationally famous, and played here in Portland last year, I believe, in Artquake. This was just one example of something with the homeless. But the interesting thing always was that the homeless were just a part of the theaters like anybody else. So if somebody like Tim Robbins was working there, he was just another artist. The homeless were just other artists. And some homeless dude could give Tim feedback, and this artist could give so-and-so feedback. So it was, and so that homeless thing among us sort of like, blah, 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 even though that had a lot to do with the attraction of the media. And I just continued to work with them for a number of years. And we did all kinds of events, poetry, art, and...
Okay. Well, that's neat. I want to ask you a question. How do you define acting? There are people that study traditional drama, and there are people who are trying to work with the new part of the motion picture industry here. How do you be creative versus being well prepared? But in general, how do you define acting? What's...
Well, my preference really was to either get back to its original definition, I'm not sure, or redefine it. So I kind of relate to acting simply as taking appropriate action from moment to moment. And performing is doing it with a consciousness of form. Now, I learned very quickly that traditional theater, for the most part, was probably the most reactionary of all art forms. And I couldn't sing, and I wasn't a musician, I wasn't a painter, so unfortunately I was stuck with this form, you know. And most of the plays that were written, and more today, even than before, were kind of boring as far as I was concerned. So my concern really went to the creative process. And I found that for certain actors, the ones who were really interested in the creative process itself, whereas traditional acting is more or less an interpretive art form in that a play or a text is already created with stage directions and everything like that, so that the artist's function is simply to interpret and present. I was more interested in the creative aspect of it, almost like what happened to singers in the 60s when they got tired of waiting around for somebody else to write the song for them, so they decided to write it for themselves. Well, suddenly something appeared called performance art. It was coming out of visual artists, really.
Mhm.
But some actors, the more creative ones, decided to jump into this thing as an opportunity to create and present their own pieces through this genre called performance art, which was really like experimental theater. And there are venues all over the country in which they can perform.
Mhm.
Most actors don't even know that these places exist. Most actors go to acting school and they hope that somebody will give them a walk-on part in a play, so they might be discovered by an agent who will then take them to Hollywood and sign them to a contract. And for most of their life, they spend most of their life looking for the opportunity. Whereas the kind of work I do with the creative process, you don't wait anymore. You just go out and you create your own pieces.
Mhm.
And I'm not even sure if that answered your question.
Well, yeah, it does. We're going to go to a demonstration in a few minutes where you and your assistant are going to show us, but tell me about the workshops you're doing here in Portland. You have some free workshops. If people want to sign up
Right.
for a free workshop, what's the phone number?
I'm running some free workshops in the process, the creative process that I've been working on. The number is 626-8713 if anybody wants any information.
Okay.
That's 626-8713.
Okay.
And really what this is about is getting back to zero.
Mhm.
It's a process I've been working on for about 30 years. And it's based on this whole idea of yielding with energy. In other words, how can we get back to a blank slate so that we're not right away projecting all our own cliches and ideas into the space before we get into the space? So it really has to do with creating through being in the moment. And it moves through a whole series of exercises.
Okay. Well, if you'd like to go ahead, we have the demonstration ready. If you'd like to
Okay,
go ahead
sure.
and start, we could
Sure.
just go ahead and start. Just
Great.
your assistant, Annette Reese, will be participating.
Okay, now this thing has been going on for about 30 years. I'm going to try to give you a demonstration, which is just going to take a matter of minutes to see if I can give you a feel for what this whole thing is about. And the first thing I like to start off with is a line that we've put down over here. Now, think of everything on this side of the line as the space or the stage, all right? And the way I would like to begin is that you come with the attitude that when you cross over the line, or whatever part of you crosses over the line is, by the very nature of crossing over the line, in performance. I give up all creative responsibility. The line takes care of it. I just say yes. Okay, so as I cross over the line, whatever is on this side of the line is now in performance. This is performing. This belongs to the regular world. Okay? Now, as I cross completely over the line, I am, by the very nature of being here, in performance. I accept that. Whatever I do is part of my performance. Whatever I think is part of my performance. Whatever I feel is part of my performance. This is my performance. And this is the way it goes. So I'm still in performance. And the performance continues until I step back over the line into what is usually known as the real world. But I don't know about that. All right. Now, that said, the process that I work with is built up of many, many exercises, which are divided into 4 major states. And we're going to do a slight demonstration in those states. This is Annette over here who's going to work with me. And the first state I want to talk about is the state of deliberation. And deliberation is related to opening yourself up, relationships, presence, developing presence. I used to think that presence was really a very esoteric word, but I realized that presence is really being in the moment, being present, filling the space that you're actually occupying and digging that space. Okay, so deliberation has certain rules that we start off with, and then it gets more and more complex as we build onto it. So to begin with, the bottom line priorities of deliberation are: you're aware of stepping over the line, you move until you stop. After you stop, you check it out. You check it all out. You check out everything in the space, the people in the space. You check out yourself, checking it out, your thoughts, your feelings. Whatever is going down in the process is the play, and you accept it as the play. Whatever you perceive to be is what's happening, and that's the way deliberation is played. So we're going to do a little piece. It'll just be for about a minute and a half. There are no words and no sounds in deliberation. Another thing is if you have a good idea, you cannot do it. Okay? So if you have a good idea, you can't do that. So we're going to play that for a little bit, and you people just watch the play that we're in. And remember that whatever you perceive us to be doing is what the play is about. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so that piece just ended when she stepped over the line. And now we build on that. That's the first level. And we build on that, and we build on that with new elements that we bring into it. A lot of what the work is about really is getting into the now, okay? And that's why we play with this idea, if you have a good idea, don't do it. Because all our lives, we've been acting on our good ideas. When it comes to creativity especially, there's the reaching for a good idea. If we can start to not do it, that's a weird place to be in. It's almost like the void, you know? So you start to learn to play in the void, and you start to see things for the first time, what the moment is informing you of. So this is the state of deliberation. It's a very subtle state. The next state is a bit more blatant. It's called sound and movement. Now, sound and movement has many different elements in it. as an introduction to sound and movement, we're just going to do a little demonstration. And a lot of it has to do with the body. And we're going to do a couple of exercises. One is called mirror, repeat, and change. So we want to use the body to create images. And then we're going to do mirror cycles. Then I'll talk a little bit more about what it's used for. We're going to do that in the space. Whoo!
Whoo! Ba!
Ba! Do!
Do!
Fa! Do!
Do! P!
P! Ooh!
Ooh!
Fa!
Fa! Pink!
Pink! Whoop!
What? Cha!
Cha! So that's a little example of just arbitrary sound and movements, and playing with different images. Now I'm going to take it to a slightly different place, and that is a little bit later on, as you develop through the elements, you jam with it to create imagery. I'll give you an example of a jam, sound and movement. So first I'll just hit an arbitrary image and start to work it. Fa, 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 fa. So that's just an example of jamming with sound and movement. And at any time, if I make a discovery of an image that I really want to explore, I can hold that image and start to flesh it out. Tonight, I just allowed the images to change. Perhaps in the process of those changing images, you would see something, a reality of some sort, a fantasy of some sort, an emotion of some sort. And this has developed further and further in this state of sound and movement. Now there's a state of rap, and rap is used to create narrative and dialogue. The way we approach rap is really, once again, through the whole body, almost like jazz. And we just keep rapping. We just keep working the rap and let it go. We'll give you a little demonstration on that now, the rap. So here I am, rapping again, rapping on the door. I rap on the door, I ask somebody to let me in. There's nobody home, so I find a key and I open the door. I sneak in like a rat. I am a rat. I find a little hole, but there's no cheese. There's no cheese. There's no cheese. There's no cheese. There's no cheese.
There's no cheese. I've got to please somebody because there's no cheese, and if there's no cheese in the cupboard, then Mother Hubbard is going to get real sad. It was such a sad, sad, gray, rainy day, and I was all ready to play, but I didn't know where to go. I didn't have any place to go. I had no place to go. So I sat myself down in a big chair. It was a big rocking chair, and that rocking chair just began to sway, and it began to sway in the wind, and it had wings. And I was a wing just flying in the sky, just a 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 flying in the sky, just flying in the sky, flying in the sky, and all of a sudden I realized I had to grab. So I let it go. I let it go. It fell on this guy's head. He started to complain. He didn't like what was happening. He started writing the newspapers. He was telling everybody about it. Everybody was getting really angry. The world was getting angry. The world was turning red, red with fire. There were fires everywhere, not just in LA, but all over the place. People didn't know what to do. So they took out the hose and they wrapped it around their nose. Their nose. Their nose. Their nose. I had a nose like nobody had ever seen. It was pink and green and had little polka dots of violet. Oh, I love those little violet polka dots. I could pick them out and I could put them and I could throw them, and there I was. I was a mercenary and I was throwing pink polka dots at all the goddamn creeps in this world. And I'm not totally sure I can say that word on TV, but I'm not going to worry about it. And there I was, and there I wasn't, and suddenly I wasn't anymore. And suddenly they had taken me off. They had taken me off. They had taken me away. They had taken me away. They had taken me away.
They had taken me away. They had taken me away to some cage. I was in a cage and had wheels on it. And I was wheeled into this dark room. And I was interrogated by a lot of different people. And they told me that I had to find a way. I had to find a way. But no matter which way I went, I was wrong. I was always very wrong. I was very mixed up. They didn't know what to do with me. So they buried me. They buried me in the ground. It was really dark. It was wet. I was getting a cold. I was getting a cold. I was getting a cold. I was getting a cold.
I was getting a cold. I was getting a cold. Oh, please, I said, get me out of this one. Just get me out of this one. I just had to go somewhere to get me out of this one. I mean, this one was not the body I wanted. I mean, they sent me down here and they gave me a body that doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's got broken things all over it. And same with my car, has broken things all over it. And everywhere I go in the city, there are broken things. And there are police. And they go around and they look for people who notice broken things. And they don't like people noticing. They don't like people noticing.
They don't like people noticing. Okay. So, this was an example, that was the line, of rap. I'll be doing workshops on this, free workshops, and if people want to find out more about it, you can call me at 626-866-8255. 8713. That's 626-8713. What I'd like to do, I think we might have time for it, is, I wasn't expecting to do this, but I want to integrate two states and show you what happens. Like Annette is going to do rap, I'm going to do sound and movement. She's going to kind of work off my images, and I'm going to try to seek the images of her rap. Okay? Let's just try that. Ooh. Ooh.
Wow, I was gonna stand right on the edge of that pier. Oh, wow, right on the edge of that pier, and I know that water is cold. It's gonna feel so tingly when I jump in. Oh, it's gonna make me feel all so good. Oh, but wait a second, maybe there's something in there. Oh, maybe there's snakes. Oh, I think I'm gonna be a snake this time around. I think I'm gonna be a snake. I just really like to be a snake. Gather something and gather. And gather and gather and gather, gather you round and eat, gather you round and eat, and gather you round and eat, and have a feast, a feast. We're gonna have a feast. We're gonna eat on those bones. It's gonna be corn cobs. It's gonna be corn cobs on those bones. It's gonna be corn cobs on those bones. I don't know why corn cobs are on those bones, but it's a new world. It's a new world, and we know there is there's gonna be a new, there's gonna be a new, there's gonna be a new, there's gonna be new, a new.
Okay. So that's just a little demonstration of integrating the two states. The last state is sound. And to begin with sound, Annette is going to demonstrate it. And we begin from nothing. And we just think jazz. So we allow whatever to come out, okay? And then thinking jazz, we try to play with that. So it becomes almost a variation of a theme which is unknown until it comes out of the mouth. Okay, so Annette will do a little jam on that. Okay, good. Thanks. So really, once again, maybe the last part of that jam was like the crying jam or whatever. But essentially what the work is about is starting with a blank space, okay? Sometimes I even wonder if on this side of the line there isn't a life going on, okay? In other words, the play is going on right now, all right? I just happen to enter into it, do my performance, whatever it is, all right? Blah, 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 and step out. But the play goes on. So really what we're doing is we're going into an empty space, and we're allowing the moment to start to inform us, and we start to create from there, all right? We just gave you a quick example, and we've been doing it for a while, so we know the different elements involved. But we've been doing it for a while. But we like to start from a 0 point, okay, and start to build from there. And once again, if you want information on these workshops, the number is 626-8713. And that's going to be it as far as the demonstration is concerned. Once again, I just want to remind you to put this in context, that we operate from these 4 different states: deliberation, sound and movement, rap, sound. We work them individually, then we start to integrate the states. We even do things after a while where we give the performer a given, working with the same principles. I think I have time maybe to illustrate that. I'm going to do one quick demonstration. We're going to go back to the rap exercise. I'm going to give Annette a given to rap on. Okay? So, Annette, why don't you try the rap exercise? She's going to do a solo on the rap exercise. And let's say she works with the theme of ghosts. Okay, so she's going to rap on ghosts. Okay.
Ghosts. 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 I've had 3 or 4 ghosts surrounding me. 3 or 4 horrible, ugly ghosts with big, huge spots that are missing, like a donut. There were donuts, like a donut. There were donuts. There were 20 donuts, and they were sitting in front of me, and I sat down on the biggest, juiciest one of the bunch, and it began to bubble. It began to bubble. It began to bubble, and it started to send me up. It was like riding on champagne bubbles. It was like riding on champagne bubbles. And there were bubbles all around. I began to try to catch those bubbles. They were all around, and I began to breathe. And I began to breathe. And I began to breathe. And there was a ghost. And there was a ghost on the TV screen. And there was a ghost, and it was beginning to shimmer. And it was beginning to shimmer like the northern lights. The northern lights began to shimmer in the sky, and it was blue.
Okay. So actually, when you're playing with the creative process, you're almost entering the realm of madness, right? Like, it's not madness because you know we're doing theater or performance or something like that. That's a good reason to become an artist, because you can get away with murder, all right? You're actually playing in this other world, in this other realm. And that's why I advise anybody who wants to get away with murder to be an artist. Okay, so we're going to continue talking about a couple of other things.
I'd like to remind people that there are more free workshops coming up. The number to call is 626-8713, and we will display that number on the screen at the close of the program. So I need to ask you this now, having done all this. Can anybody come to this workshop?
Yeah, anybody can come. When I first started working, at the very beginning, it was mostly actors who were working with me. And then people from different art forms started to work with me: sculptors, painters, musicians, writers, whatever. And then over the last 7 or 8 years, a lot of people who weren't even in the arts started working with me. Some people would come and they would say, I really don't want to perform, I have no interest in that. And that's fine, because it's really just about getting in touch with your own creative process. But a lot of these people ended up performing, creating their own pieces. And once again, the nature of the pieces are not always even words. You know, it's whatever. And learning to utilize whatever best communicates your personal discovery. I mean, that's really what it's all about, you know. I mean, what is theater except me communicating? I mean, this is a form of it, you know. We're just doing a little improv over here, a little dance, you know, and communicating to each other our own personal discoveries. So it sort of like really just gets down to that, and how to free up, you know. The process has been very interesting because I found it to be, in exploring it, uh, uh, always filled with surprises. Like I would be very confused as to what spontaneity was. People would come to me and say, I want to be more spontaneous. And then I came to realize that everybody is spontaneous. Even people who claim to be too heady are spontaneous. The problem for them is they don't enjoy the nature of the spontaneity because it takes them to their head right away. So it's not that, they want to be more spontaneous. They would like to change the nature of their spontaneity. In other words, you don't want to get out of your head. You just want to know where to put your head so that it's functioning with the body, mind and body.
Well, I attended one of your workshops, and I learned a great deal in a short period of time, but I'll tell you, I ran out of stuff, and I was really grateful when you said if you get a good idea, don't use it, because I didn't have to worry about if I had a bunch of good ideas prepared. Now, how's your work different from the work that's done in traditional schools?
Well, traditional schools are really set up just the opposite. I mean, there's all the pressure to get it together, get out there and look good, Traditional schools are really concerned also with the process of how to take words from a page. And very often the pages even tell you where to go to, or the director tells you where to go to, and to interpret that thing so it becomes a live event. So you always feel like you have to go in there with something. This is the creative process. It's much, much different. It's really about creating an environment in which you are serving only as a conjurer. And out of your conjuring, through the exercises, things come up and inform you. Okay? And now you make a choice as to whether you want to go with that one or not. And if you don't go with it, you let it go, continue to conjure until the next thing comes up, and then you decide whether or not you want to go with that. So it's coming from a completely different place. I don't feel that like traditional theaters are really that concerned with the creation of pieces.
Well, now you did a seminar on, I think it was called Performance Art versus Theater Art.
Yeah,
What's
theater
the
performance
difference?
art.
Now tell me what happened with that.
Well, what happened was I invited museum curators, performance artists, theater critics, and performers. And had like these seats out. And for some reason, all the people who thought they were in the performance art world sat on one side, and all the people who thought they were in the theater world, I didn't assign seats, sat on the other side. They ended up having a big fight, almost came to blows. The audience was screaming and everything. And at the end, they all ran over to me and they said, why did you do this? Why did you have to create like all this turmoil and everything like that? I said, what did I do? They said, this whole thing about theater performance art, what's the difference? I said, no, that's what you did. What I meant was theater performance art. What's the difference? In other words, what's the difference what you call anything, You just do it. I mean, if you want to call it performance art today, call it performance art today. I still think what I do is theater. It doesn't make any difference, You just want to communicate.
Well, we have a few minutes left. I want you to tell me about the guy who came in and followed you around and did all 17 characters.
Oh, okay. So this once again relates to this thing of, like, I want to do producing also as an art form. And my feeling for a long, long time was that whatever turned me on, if I could find a way to get it on stage, I would get it on stage. Now, one thing I never did in L.A. was get pitched by people. People would never come to me to pitch a play. But there was this one guy who was an ex-cocaine addict who had written the only play he had ever written, which was a play about cocaine with 17 characters. And he brought it up to me, and it was terrible. And I told him, it's terrible. Man, it's terrible. I don't want to do it. I can't afford to do a piece about 17 characters, and I don't want to do a play about cocaine. So thanks, but no thanks. And he said, but wait a second, Scott. Let me just show you something. It's like, no, please. No, you got to see that, And he says, and there's this character in the play, and he comes out, and he walks like this, and he talks like this, and this is what do you think of that? I said, no, it's terrible, please. But wait a second, now there's this chick, and she's got these big tits, and she comes out, and she and he's running all around my office, and I'm going crazy, like, how do I get rid of this guy? And I'm watching this thing, and as I see it, I kind of get fascinated by it. And I say, Michael, I got an idea. If you will pitch the audience like you're pitching me, I'll produce the pitch. Okay, I'll give you some lights and a little music. He said, oh, and I play the accordion too. So I said, fine, we'll bring the accordion into it. So really, I called it performing playwrights. And he, on stage now, pitched the audience the way he pitched me, did all the characters, played his accordion, and won an LA Weekly award and became like a whole thing where writers all over LA were calling me up to be in the Performing Playwright series. So it's just an example of seeing something and realizing it too has potential. You know, just changing the context a little bit.
Okay. Well, and in some of the information that I read about you, you said that you don't like plays, that you'd rather do short stories. I guess we need to wrap it up. We've got a couple of minutes left, and I wanted to remind people we will be doing another program about your work in the future, and that they should watch for future air dates of this program. And you are offering some free workshops, and the number is 626-8713. And there's so much more here that I'd like to talk to you about, but we do have to say goodnight. This has been Solaria Presents, and this is Scott Kelman, the next National Treasure, and his assistant, Annette Reese, and I'm KT, and I'm saying goodnight for Solaria.